All right. Thank you, everyone, again for coming out. I'm going to attempt to do this presentation in 35 minutes. It's normally a little bit longer than that, but I think I'm going to try and speak quick because this was a presentation mostly created to educate people about Bitcoin and why Bitcoin is important and why the concept of unconfiscatable, I feel, is so important to everyone, to the entire world. And I'll just do it with this presentation. Of course, there's no reason for me to talk about myself. The slide right there, what you're seeing here is this is like the entire history of Bitcoin. It's just there as a backdrop for the presentation. I always take these presentations to the very early days, in order to describe what Bitcoin is. And in the very first paragraph of Satoshi's paper, he describes it as digital signatures provide part of the solution, but the main benefits are lost if a trusted third party is still required to prevent double spending. We propose a solution to the double spending problem using a peer-to-peer network. The network timestamps transactions by hashing them into an ongoing chain of hash-based proof of work, forming a record that cannot be changed without redoing the proof of work. So you see the concept of proof of work right there in pretty much the third sentence of Satoshi's white paper. And we're going to get to why proof of work is important. But everyone needs to understand that proof of work is the innovation. And so many people were trying to solve the proof of work even before Satoshi was able to find a way to do it. And he was the first one that was able to do it. And in the beginning, Bitcoin didn't have any value. This chart only goes back to the middle of 2010. And you can see that it was still approximately 10 cents until the very first use case was discovered and actually made it to the media. And this is how I also found out about Bitcoin, which is why this use case remains very, very important to me. And that was the use case of Bitcoin being uncensorable. It was first mentioned by a core developer named Amir Taki, who suggested that WikiLeaks should be using Bitcoin for its donations once they got cut off from Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal. And this is where I first heard about Bitcoin through the Max Kaiser show as a use case. Now, WikiLeaks did not initially start accepting Bitcoin, but it didn't matter because when it comes to markets, speculation is what really, really matters. And in people's heads, this was already a use case. And speculation already started driving Bitcoin to the upside. Though that wasn't the only one. A few months after that, Silk Road launched. And that created another example of yet the same use case. This concept of Bitcoin being uncensorable as value transfer for your products or services. Silk Road being that it provided a product, and WikiLeaks provided a service of showing you government documents. And the Silk Road use case really helped drive Bitcoin to that $30 value in 2011. And that was really culminated out of the state of New York with Chuck Schumer when he went on TV and basically did the greatest 30-minute introduction to Bitcoin ever. I don't know how he managed to do it in 30 seconds. Sorry, not 30 minutes. In 34 seconds, he managed to teach people what and how to use Tor, what and how to use Silk Road, and how to buy things from Silk Road using Bitcoin. And that happened right near that peak of the $30 price. And this is also where we had our biggest bubble. Bitcoin then fell all the way down to $2 from that peak. Now, not really all that much happened in 2012, but this use case of being uncensorable, value transfer really resonated with a lot of people until 2013. Now, 2013 demonstrated yet another use case for Bitcoin, and hence that use case is now the name of this conference, because this was the use case that actually got me off, my butt, go out and find that Bitcoin and actually buy it. And that happened in Cyprus when the European Union, the European government, basically shut down all of Cyprus bank accounts, and they confiscated 50% of everybody's money that had over 100,000 euros. So if you had 200,000 euros in your Cyprus bank account, anything beyond that 100, half of it was just gone, and they just called it taxation. They initially debated only taking 10% from everyone or 7% from everyone, and then they decided to only take 47.5% from those that had over 100,000 euros. So right there, you see a display for another use case of Bitcoin being unconfiscatable, but only if you properly protect it. Now, that use case, again, is easily shown here in the US, where in 2014, it was calculated that civil asset forfeiture by law enforcement was responsible for more confiscated money than burglaries that year. So basically, law enforcement that decide to confiscate your money and accuse your money of doing the crime was actually responsible for more theft. And that is, once again, an example of why money and value that is unconfiscatable is so critical to your freedom. Now, of course, Bitcoin isn't always unconfiscatable. We can also talk about the Silk Road case when the US government was able to seize 144,000 Bitcoin through Ross Ulbricht's computer. And that's because it wasn't properly protected. Bitcoin is only unconfiscatable when it's properly protected. Now, the government can use coercion to try and get you to turn that Bitcoin in. And this was discussed on another panel through putting people in prison for contempt of court until you turn it over. But the point is that they still can't freeze that account and they can't take it. So the government ended up selling that 144,000 Bitcoin for only $48 million because they were a little impatient, which I guess is good, because if they would have waited a couple of years, they could have gotten 2.4 billion. And if they would have waited, and if this article would have waited about a week, that would have been about 4 billion. So that was pretty much the peak of that amount. And that kind of almost explains the entire history of the run-up into the 2013 bubble, as both of those use cases were on full display. And those are, I believe, the true properties of a blockchain. To me, the proof of work blockchain creates those two properties. Now, at the very peak, of course, we all remember Mt. Gox, which is once again another example of, if you don't properly protect your keys, they are, of course, at risk of theft, hacked, or if you hold your Bitcoin with a third party, pretty much anything can happen, as we saw. Now, I don't necessarily blame Mt. Gox for everything. I looked back at a lot of documents or a lot of public articles trying to figure out what really happened to Mt. Gox, and this was probably the best article that I had found. And it was written in 2016, but it kind of went under the radar, and it basically explained the history of Mt. Gox, and that, for example, and this is a more Bitcoin-oriented crowd, how many of you know that that Mark Karpeles did not create Mt. Gox? Oh, yeah, majority. He bought it from a man named he bought it from a man named Jeb McCaleb, and Jeb McCaleb then went on to create the Ripple token, and then went on to create the Stellar token. But when he sold Mt. Gox to Mark Karpeles, about 2 months later, there was an email exchange between Mark and Jeb McCaleb, where Mark is saying, "Hey, there's 80,000 Bitcoin missing. What's going on?" And he started giving him suggestions on what he can do to recover 80,000 Bitcoin in 2011, I might add, where not many people, when there wasn't even, this is before the first halving, so not even that much Bitcoin was around. And he says, well, maybe you can just mine it. He says, well, you can slowly buy Bitcoin with a bot that Mt. Gox has. So he carried all these suggestions, but that wasn't even the worst thing. The worst thing happened 2 months later when Mt. Gox got hacked. And there was some evidence that it came through Jib McCaleb's old computer that had some admin rights. Now, the initial problem of 80,000 missing Bitcoin was only $60,000. But that problem became an $800,000 problem 2 months later when the price of Bitcoin started going up to that $30 range. And that was back in 2011. And of course, Bitcoin fell based on your typical hyperwave or bubble chart. And we bottomed, though Tyler will say that that wasn't a hyperwave back then, but we are in one now. And so as the bear market began of 2014, we witnessed both of those properties of Bitcoin, it being unconfiscatable and censorship-resistant value transfer in 2015 with the Greek banking crisis. It happened when Bitcoin was pretty much considered dead. And I think it went a long way in helping Bitcoin recover back to the bull market. And those of you that remember what happened during the Greek banking shutdown in their fight with the European Union, people basically were not allowed access to their money, and they were put on allowance. So for about 2 weeks, people were literally only allowed to withdraw a maximum of 60 euros a day from an ATM machine. And about a week or two later, they decided, okay, we have to allow people to take more money. So they said, okay, so now you can withdraw up to 420 euros, but that's your allowance for the entire week. So this shows both of those fundamental properties of Bitcoin being censorship resistant and unconfiscatable, that you are the only one holding on to that Bitcoin. And what happens when the government says you can withdraw 420 euros, but that's all you can take for a week? Well, this is what it looked like in Greece that Monday when the banks or the ATMs opened. I don't think the banks opened. I mean, God, who would want to be a teller at that bank on Monday? But the ATMs opened, and this was the scene in Greece that Monday, and everyone rushed to withdraw their 420 euros for that week. And this picture is absolutely no different than all of the other bank runs we've seen throughout history. Right there in the upper right, we have the 1907 financial crisis in the US. It was actually one of the biggest financial crises we ever had, comparable to the 1929 stock market crash. It was just different because the market didn't have such a run-up in price that needed to crash. The pictures here in the middle are from Germany. That's Weimar Republic. That's also from Germany. Burning banknotes for heat because the paper was, more efficient as heat at the time than money. That was their money. That was in 1923. This picture here, this is the 1934, following the Great Depression. And again, there are people burning, banknotes that all of a sudden became worthless. And once again, let's go to the present time of that is Zimbabwe in 2007 during their hyperinflation. So what do all these pictures have in common? Well, actually, let me say, what is the difference between these pictures? Time and basically technology, right? Color. Though banking technology hasn't really changed other than Bitcoin, right? The only difference between these pictures is really the recent ones are in color and the old ones have to be black and white. But speaking of the issues in Zimbabwe and Weimar Republic and 1934, this brings us to another property of Bitcoin, but I don't believe it's the property of the blockchain. It's just the property of Bitcoin, because Satoshi chose to make Bitcoin more similar to gold than more similar to the current financial system. And I'm sure everyone had seen this. This is the gold confiscation bill in 1933. And you can see it right there that criminal penalties for violations would be $10,000 fine or 10 years imprisonment. And this is for people that did not want to turn in their gold. Now, it was easy for government to confiscate the gold because the banks were the middleman holding all that gold on behalf of the people. And the government didn't really go door to door hunting people's gold, even though some people still turned it in. But Satoshi did choose to make it like gold. And this brings us to Saifedean Ammous's book, The Bitcoin Standard. How many of you have read the book? Excellent. Saif, are you here? Raise your hand. I don't see him. All right, should be around. But this book actually helped me understand why the hardness of gold and the money property of gold is so important. And Satoshi chose to make Bitcoin more like gold. And if we go into the book, right there early on, right on page 5, Saifedean describes what is hard money, and I'll just read it. If people choose a hard money with a high stock-to-flow ratio as a store of value, their purchasing of it to store it would increase demand for it, causing a rise in its price, which would incentivize its producers to make more of it. But because the flow is small compared to the existing supply, even a large increase in new production is unlikely to depress the price significantly. Okay? So this is where you start to understand why this property of hard money and gold has been so important throughout the years. So he goes on, hard money, by taking the question of supply out of the hands of governments and their economist propagandists, would force everyone to be productive to society instead of seeking to get rich through the fool's errand of monetary manipulation. International economic summits are convened where world leaders try to negotiate each other's acceptable currency devaluation, making the value of the currency an issue of geopolitical importance. And finally, he goes on page 173, for every other money, as its value rises, those who can produce it will start producing more of it, whether it's rhinestones, seashells, silver, gold, copper, or government money. Everyone will have an incentive to try to produce more. Bitcoin is the hardest money ever invented. Growth in its value cannot possibly increase its supply. It can only make the network more secure and immutable to attack. And it makes Bitcoin fundamentally different from every other money. So this is where, as you start to dig into these ideas, this is where you start to understand why Satoshi created Bitcoin with this finite supply to try to not only replicate that property of gold, but also to make it even better, because I believe gold is confiscatable. With the invention of metal detectors and other technology, it's very, very hard to store your gold and especially to move your gold in time of crisis. But with Bitcoin, you could. You can just memorize your private key and you are good to go. So those are the three fundamental properties of Bitcoin: unconfiscatable, uncensorable, and uninflatable or unprintable. And the third one stems from the fact that the other two require this proof of work blockchain. And this is how Bitcoin competes really, really well with the current financial system. One of Satoshi's early quotes is, the nature of Bitcoin is such that once version 0.1 was released, the core design was set in stone for the rest of its lifetime. And everyone that tries to force their idea of the code into Bitcoin will just end up making a counterfeit Bitcoin, just like people always try to make counterfeit gold. So again, going back to Saifedean's book, The Bitcoin Standard, this immutability is not a feature of the Bitcoin software, which is trivial to change for everyone with coding skills, but rather is grounded in the economics of the currency and network and stems from the difficulty of getting every member of the network to adopt the same change to the software. Okay? So it's the network that will enforce that economic monetary policy of Bitcoin and its predictable, inflation rate, which is decelerating over time. And this created all of these use cases. This was an article I wrote in early 2016, just talking about the use cases of Bitcoin, of it using these properties of being unconfiscatable and censorship resistant, from donations to WikiLeaks to transferring value cross borders. And those three properties is how Bitcoin competes amazingly well today, or even years ago, with the current financial system, US dollar, the euro, and gold. But there are a few things where Bitcoin has been lacking, but it's greatly improving, and that is scalability and fungibility. With the latest changes and finally getting SegWit in with the user-activated soft fork, Bitcoin is starting to scale. We have Lightning is already in beta, I believe. Schnorr should be coming in with the latest changes. And fungibility and privacy, again, Schnorr, Bulletproofs, Tumblebit, all of these changes are coming in. So I think it's only a matter of time before Bitcoin is able to compete globally, not only in those first three properties, but also in scalability and fungibility. However, Bitcoin still struggles today and will probably struggle for the foreseeable future with volatility and coin security. So volatility, this is the, you can see the transactions went up. This was during 2017. This is the transaction fee in blue, and it went all the way up, and now it has come down. SegWit adoption is now close to 50%, not as great as it could be, but good enough. And the latest on Schnorr and why it's not only a scaling solution, but also a privacy solution. Not a perfect one, but it's a start. And Lightning is being adopted really, really quickly. Now, on the price volatility perspective, Bitcoin still struggles. We went all the way to $20,000. I never thought it should have gotten that high. I started getting nervous once it started getting above 7,000. And I kind of had a feeling that, hey, the higher we go, the more pain you're going to have on the other side. And you can see that Bitcoin is way more volatile. That's the dark pink line. Way more volatile than other assets. Though there are times when other assets become more volatile. You can see right here, this is oil. So there was a 3 or 4 month stretch where oil was more volatile. Here's the bond market. Again, it was a little bit more volatile than Bitcoin for a good 3 to 4 months. And even the stock market every now and then breaks Bitcoin's volatility chart. Now, Bitcoin's volatility has been going down over time. The red chart, that's Bitcoin's volatility. And right here in the blue, you see the US dollar versus the euro. I'm actually expecting the US dollar versus the euro volatility to increase in the near future. But the trajectory of Bitcoin's volatility has been down, and that's a good thing. Now, fiat volatility can get very, very crazy. Now, here is a list of every single hyperinflation last century. So, well, the top one is 1975 in France, but since then, from Weimar Germany in 1920, and this is all the way down into the 90s, these are all instances where the volatility of fiat of a country that, we all know, basically hit above 50% in a single month. So your money devalued by more than 50% in 1 month. Now, I did get this from a book that kind of stopped in the 90s. So I had to do, the rest of the legwork. This goes to 98. So I went and took a look at, hey, have there been hyperinflation events this decade, or this century in the last 20 years? And here they are. Sudan, Venezuela, Iran, Argentina, South Sudan, Ukraine, Russia, Angola, Zimbabwe for the second time, Turkey. And these are definitions basically. I think one of them, Angola, had only a 27%. But these are basically your currency devalues by more than 50% in a single month. And of course, we all know about the current big one in Venezuela. And here it is. This is Venezuela. This was the unofficial exchange rate, the one in blue. And this was the official government exchange rate. This is going from 2010 to 2018. And eventually the government admitted, hey, you know what? We're going to create a new currency. And all of a sudden, they matched. Okay. So we're watching that ongoing. And here's the more recent hyperinflation in Zimbabwe. This is part 2 on a 10th year anniversary from their prior hyperinflation. Zimbabwe did it again, going up 100. The exchange rate going up 185% in a matter of about a month and a half. But most of these hyperinflations are actually political events. They're not currency events. I mean, the U.S. government can't print money fast enough to cause serious inflation. And all of these historical inflations are usually either war or, you get into communism or you get out of communism, or into socialism and out of socialism. That's causing a lot of these events. And it's not even like on a monthly scale, right? We've seen some crazy volatility in fiat on a daily scale. So here is Brexit when the UK voted for Brexit. On that one day, the exchange rate of the British pound, this is to the dollar, moved 9% in a single day. So almost a 10% move in your currency in one day. And we're talking US versus the UK. And here's another example. When the Swiss peg broke, the volatility of the Swiss franc versus the euro, the euro devalued against the Swiss franc by 30% when they broke the peg on a single day. You had a 30% move, and it affected the stock market as well. So we can see that even though Bitcoin has been more volatile over time, it hasn't had, we can find developed countries with comparable volatility. Good. And of course, Bitcoin security. Bitcoin security is, I think, going to be a problem for the foreseeable future. We talked about it on an earlier panel. And the tools need to be better. Tools need to be easier. But yeah, so if you just Google Bitcoin hacked, Bitcoin doesn't actually get hacked. People and companies get hacked when they don't properly protect their Bitcoin. But coin security, there still needs a lot of work needs to be done in order for people to be comfortable with keeping their money in Bitcoin the way they're comfortable keeping their money at a bank. I personally am way more comfortable keeping my money in Bitcoin versus a bank, but the average person will need to get there eventually. All right, so what do I see? What can drive this mass adoption into Bitcoin to help it be more stable when more people start using it? Well, this takes me back to the European Union. I do think that the European Common Currency, it's been around for, 20 years now, 25? I don't think it has another 25 years in it. I'm not even sure it has another 10 years in it. So I do believe that it's a flawed currency across the European region for several reasons. One of them is there's no single language, there's no single culture. There's no cohesion, and each country is looking out for their own best interest. It's very different than US with the states. They also never accumulated their debt, and that's why we saw the issue in Greece, and there will probably be a similar issue in other countries like Italy. It was funny, I think Giacomo's still here. I did a similar presentation in Italy like a year ago, and I said, hey guys, I have no idea how your banks are still functioning, and you guys haven't had the Greece event, and everyone in that audience agreed with me. So they know it's coming. Oh. There we go. And another thing that I see as a drive that will bring people into Bitcoin is government's push for the elimination of cash. And there was a great paper here by the Harvard Business Review that analyzed it, and they talked about the 3 reasons why governments are trying to eliminate cash. And I've talked about these before I found this article. So without cash, you can't have a bank run. As you saw with those pictures of Greece and Weimar Republic and US in the 30s and Zimbabwe, people were running to ATM machines because there was cash to withdraw. If there's no cash to withdraw, there's no ATM machines at all. You can't have a run on a bank if there's no cash. All of those pictures go directly to the history books, and they wouldn't even exist because without cash, can't have a run on a bank. So it saves that visual and it doesn't exist. The other one was interesting because lots of government economists believe that we should have way lower interest rates. Interest rates should be negative. We should be taking people's money away if they don't spend the money that's just sitting in the bank doing nothing. And I was at a conference where Nouriel Roubini was also a speaker, and he was seriously talking about the potential for 10% negative interest rate. Negative 10%. Confiscate 10% of your money that you don't spend that just sits there in the bank. And raised my hand during Q&A, and I said, Bitcoin will not let you do that. You can eliminate all the cash you want to force that 10% interest rate. But people have a way to exit that system and be in Bitcoin because they will not let you confiscate 10% of the money because you don't like how they're spending their money. So that was the second reason, being able to control the economy even more. Guys? Cool, thank you. Nope. No. Yep, right there. Right there, perfect. Thank you. Excellent. And this need to meddle in the economy and interest rates even more, that's the second reason. And the third reason, as they used India as an example, every government thinks that all of its citizens are just there to evade their taxes. And the reason why they haven't created this utopia is because we haven't given them enough time and we don't give them enough money. Now, it's a little more true in India because of their cash economy. They calculated that 30 to 45% of the GDP of India is unaccounted for because of the cash economy. So this need to collect every single penny of tax revenue is another major reason for all of these money laundering laws and this elimination of cash, because without cash, they would be able to collect all the taxes that they like. They also did an evaluation of how much money it costs to maintain a cash economy, and India ranked pretty high along with many European countries. However, when these countries try to eliminate that cash, what you're looking at is a graphic, and in the upper right hand corner you see Germany, Belgium, and France, and these are the three countries that are most ready to eliminate cash technologically, and they would also benefit the most. Now, India would benefit more than them because it's further to the right on this chart, but India is way down at the bottom, so that means they are not technologically ready to eliminate cash, but they sure are trying. If you guys saw what happened over in India about a year and a half ago, and they tried to cancel out their big bills. Their big bills being approximately a $5 US bill was their biggest bill. Now, France is doing this part. France is making you identify yourself for any purchases over 1,000 euros in cash. If you are French, if you are a foreigner, you get a little bit of leeway. I think it's up to 8,000 so 8,000 is your allowance if you're not French. If you're French, you can only spend 1,000. The US had an interesting law passed in Louisiana. Louisiana passed a law saying that you're not allowed to sell secondhand goods for cash. So if you have a garage sale and you wanted to sell that bicycle, you better be accepting credit card payments or a check, and it has to go through the banking system. So here, a secondhand dealer shall not enter into any cash transaction in payment for the purchase of junk or used secondhand property. RS 37, 1866. So again, this push for eliminating cash. Germany is trying to go even further. They're trying to eliminate any collectible market, where they're saying that because they feel that terrorists are financing their operations by digging excavations of archaeological sites, they have decided to pass a law that any cultural value or any collector value over 100 euros now needs to be registered, and the government needs to know about it. And basically, here's where it's headed. If you have that, $10,000, $15,000 painting on your wall, they need to know about it, because they will say, hey, we wanna tax you on that the way they tax you on your house, because they know you're gonna want that painting and you're not ready to sell it. So these are the kinds of reasons that will drive people into Bitcoin in order to protect some of that value or to have more control of that value. And this is one of my favorite tweets from Giacomo. And this brings us to why is it Bitcoin and not something else? And it was very beautifully stated when he said Bitcoin maximalism, also known as common sense, where Bitcoin could succeed, or we hope it does. And it's in the middle of the spectrum, because here are the other two extremes. You have the no coiner, which is your Nouriel Rubini, that not even Bitcoin can exist. And then you have your multi-coiner, which is Bitcoin is so infinitely replicatable that my version of Bitcoin is the best, and that's your Vitalik or pretty much anyone else that started an altcoin or a Bitcoin clone. And I really wanted to put this chart together, and it really wasn't simple. I wanted to break down the altcoins in a Venn diagram. Basically, this is the crypto space outside of Bitcoin. I mean, we have 2,000 more of these altcoins, shitcoins, whatever you want to call them, or projects. And how do they rank? So it had to be a 4-part Venn diagram. And I broke things down into proof of work, proof of other, which is your proof of stake, proof of importance, proof of whatever you want to do. We also have ICOs and airdrops. And then we have your blockchains. These are your databases that don't have a token. So this is probably, so some of these things are way more scammy than others. I don't have time to go through all of them. And you also have combinations of the bunch, right? You have Ripple, which is kind of like a database, but for some reason has a token. I still don't know why. Most people don't either. I mean, some of them get really, really scammy, like TPay here, which is, it wasn't just an ICO. It's also a proof of stake. So once you hand out your token to your friends, they can now make more token by being proof of stake. And of course, yeah. So that's in that bucket. EOS here, Ethereum is still proof of work, so it stays in a proof of work bucket, and it's still a database for smart contracts. I have Rootstock here because their token is somewhat pegged to Bitcoin, and so they're a side chain and they are a smart contract platform. Now, to me, the only ones that have a claim, and I asked this question when I was moderating the panel, is what about other proof of work tokens? These are your Monero and your Litecoin. Well, why can't they succeed? Well, that's because Satoshi gave us the definition of proof of a blockchain. It has to be proof of work. So it's right there in the code, in the main file as a comment. When they solve proof of work, they broadcast the block to everyone, and the block is added to the blockchain. So sticking with this concept that you have to be proof of work to be a blockchain, what do we have? And why is proof of work so important? Well, let's go back to an old email. Here's an email from 2001. And I'm just going to read the last part, and it's in the conversation. How Finney is in this conversation, several other people that are cypherpunks, and I'm just going to read the part in bold. Personally, I like the idea of Hashcash, if and only if it's structured like a real currency as opposed to simply proof of work. In the real world, you pay for resources used. In many cases, this should also apply to peer-to-peer and other computer systems. Of course, getting Hashcash workable as a real currency is extremely difficult. I've thought of a scheme that would work. Coins are signed by the owner and can only be changed, signed to a different owner by that owner. Except you need a decentralized central database of all the Hashcash that's been used. Unworkable. Well, that could be one of two words. Let's say shit, spent twice problem again. Okay, so this is someone trying to create proof of work, what Satoshi did, thinking about the problem, trying to find a way to solve it, and this person is actually in this room. Not sure if he's in this room at the moment, but he was earlier on stage. That was Peter Todd when he was 15 years old. in an email conversation with Hal Finney. Okay, so Peter, you here? Where is he? Oh, he walked out. Saw him earlier. So what people need to understand that some very smart people have been trying to solve this problem for a very, very, very long time. And when another person comes in and shows up like last year and says, I got it. Bitcoin has a problem and I will solve it. Like, they don't understand that all of these ideas, they've been thought of a long time ago, because this is from 2001. Saturday afternoon, man. Most of us are playing video games, man. 15. There's a 12:35 right there. That's Saturday afternoon for Peter Todd, right? Trying to solve proof of work in 2001. And Satoshi finally did. And that's what makes Bitcoin really, really unique. Now, a lot of people don't like the fact that things are proof of work because mining chews a lot of electricity. Once again, let's go over to the Bitcoin standard and a footnote from Saifedean's book. The question of whether Bitcoin wastes electricity is at its heart a misunderstanding of the fundamentally objective nature of value. Electricity is generated worldwide in large quantities to satisfy the needs of consumers. The only judgment about whether this electricity has gone to waste or not lies with the consumer who pays for it. People who are willing to pay the cost of the operation of the Bitcoin network for the transactions are effectively financing this electricity consumption, which means the electricity is being produced to satisfy consumer needs and has not been wasted. Functionally speaking, proof of work is the only method humans have invented for creating digital hard money. If people find that worth paying for, then the electricity has not been wasted. And in the book, he has another awesome quote that wait a minute. Sorry. And this brings us to this idea of what about other proof of work coins like Litecoin and potentially Monero. So here's what really did it for me in my understanding as to why Litecoin is just not needed. And it goes all the way back to silver. By the 19th century, however, with the development of modern banking and the improvement in methods of communication, individuals could transact with paper money and checks backed by gold in the treasuries of their banks and central banks. This made gold-backed transactions possible at any scale, thus obviating the need for silver's monetary role and gathering all essential monetary salability properties in the gold standard. This really drove it home for me. It basically told me that silver, there was a reason why silver continues to devalue against gold, because it continues to lose its monetary property. Because as of the 19th century, with technology, gold is able to scale for smaller and smaller transactions, especially when it was back in fiat, and you can subdivide fiat. So with the Lightning Network and with other scalability solutions, Bitcoin will be usable at any scale, thus making the need for Litecoin irrelevant. Now, some people saw that way earlier than others. Here's Luke Dash Jr. in 2013 explaining Litecoin, where he says, right here, Litecoin and other scam coins like it, on the other hand, do not bring anything new to the table. They are just mere clones that retain the pump and dump nature of Bitcoin, but without the innovation that makes Bitcoin's value as a currency. And he talked about the 3 changes that Litecoin did. It changed the math of proof of work, which he says doesn't really make it secure. And they created a faster block time, which again doesn't change anything, potentially makes it less secure, and created a larger currency supply, which won't matter once Bitcoin starts to scale, and it already has. And Monero is basically the same thing. Once Bitcoin gets its privacy solutions and fungibility, again, the need for Monero will slowly disappear over time. That is it for me, guys. This was my presentation of Bitcoin versus blockchain. And thank you all so much for coming. Thank you, guys.